Ohio Governor John Kasich gave his 5th State of the State speech last night, spending 55 minutes talking about taxes and fiscal policy he wants to implement this year before moving on to some of his other topics. That is the subject of today's opinion show when we get together with members of the editorial board of the Plain Dealer and the Northeast Ohio Media Group. I'm here with opinion director Betsy Sullivan and editorial writers Sharon Broussard, Chris Evans, and Pete Krouse. So Betsy, what surprised you about this speech?
I think, besides its length, that he spent so much time on the nitty-gritty of his budget proposal rather than kind of speaking in kind of more the sweeping generalizations. Even though he started out with the rah-rah talk about the big turnaround since 2010, and he's standing in sort of ground zero for the recession impact in terms of jobs in Wilmington, Ohio, which still hasn't recovered. But we were discussing it this morning that a lot of it seemed to me to be aimed at the Republican-dominated legislature, which, in his prior budget did not support him in his plan to create a lot more income tax cuts by increasing taxes in other ways. So taxes on the oil and gas industry, on tobacco products, kind of shifting the burden of business taxes around and increasing the sales tax. And that's, he's going to have a big battle on his hands if he's expecting to get that through. And, we had John Husted, the Secretary of State, in this morning, and he didn't necessarily give him, 100% likelihood that he would get what he wants on that either.
He never mentioned the word sales tax. He never mentioned the cigarette tax. He called it a consumption tax. But what's interesting about what you just said is that the surprise was that he was talking to the legislators. That's kind of the purpose of the State of the State, but he's never done that before. He's always been talking to us and the public.
Well, he was more like, this was a general speaking to the Army. He was telling them exactly what he wanted done, and he, did it in this rah context, and he's calling out, hey Randy, hey Tim, hey stand up.
He even told them when they could applaud. You could applaud for him.
Yeah, exactly. Applaud for my wife. She lives with me.
But this is like potentially a dissident Army. I noticed that he had a lot of praise for higher education because those presidents have come together and worked jointly on a budget, on a capital budget, and on an operating budget, and decided how to divvy the money. And there was definitely, a spanking for K through 12. Already many superintendents are speaking out, and you better believe that they're calling their representatives and saying this is an unfair formula, and it's going to gut us and make us go back to the taxpayers who do not want to hear about more taxes, so please help us.
He seems to be in a battle for the hearts and minds of the legislators, and the battle is with what he kept talking about in the special interests. I think he used the word beatings 3 times to talk about the way special interests deal with the legislators, and he's trying to overcome that. It seems like that. If you remember back to his first State of the State or his first inaugural speech, he talked about if special interests get in his way, he'll throw them under the bus. Last night he talked with a little more strength about those special interests. Do you think he's going to be more willing to call them out as this battle ensues?
Well, I think that, yes, with the oil and gas industry in particular. He was recently out in Wyoming on his federal balanced budget tour.
Not running for president tour.
Right, yeah, and not knowing whether he's running for president. And he claims to have been aghast at when they learned what Ohio was reaping in terms of taxes.
2 dimes, right?
Yeah,
right. But he's absolutely right. Kasich's absolutely right. And the sad part about this is that with the lower gas prices right now, the revenues that the industry was reaping are not necessarily there. So we've kind of missed the boat to a certain
extent. But that's going to come back.
It will come back, but we've missed out on a lot of money.
How palatable is that now that, the industry is actually shrinking?
I have to applaud the governor for, he was basically turned back by the legislature last time on a severance tax increase because of the power of the oil and gas lobby. He's come back with a bigger proposal this time.
Right.
And I applaud that. I think that, he's basically, essentially calling their bluff. And I think that unlike all the other elements of his tax package, I think that there might be a possibility there actually, because, I do think it's quite apparent that our severance taxes, belong to another era. Prior to our becoming an energy-rich state is, I think, a phrasing that he actually used in the speech. It sort of took me aback to think about Ohio that way again, but it is true, and we should not allow ourselves to be exploited.
Right.
Yeah.
And he put it in, you know, I mean, he's a great storyteller. So was it the story about the governor of Wyoming,
Yeah.
the greatest governor in the history of Wyoming?
And a former oil and gas guy.
Right, and then when the special interests came to him and said, you know, hey, we don't like these hikes, you know, he took out his checkbook and said, you know,
To give them back their donation.
What do I owe you? Now, who knows if the story's true or not? But it was
It was a
a
good
compelling
story.
story. Yeah.
Yeah.
He talked in great detail about severance tax, but when it came to his other taxes, he didn't even name them. He just kept
Yeah, he
saying
never said
consumption
tobacco.
tax. He
Right.
never, I
Yeah.
don't think he used the word sales tax, and I'm sure he didn't mention the cigarette tax.
No.
Why? What do you think that is, Pete?
Sales tax is not going to be particularly popular because a lot of people will consider that regressive because it would affect lower income people disproportionately.
You think the legislators were fooled by saying consumption?
Well, no, but
tax?
I think the legislature is going to get lobbied by their constituents. So he was still talking to people in general. But the question that I have has to do with his desire to lower the income tax and increase the consumption tax. I'm not quite sure I understand how it affects small businesses. He wants to lower the income tax for those who put their business earnings on their income tax. But what does this mean for somebody who, say, is a sole proprietor and they're not going to have to pay the income tax, but they aren't necessarily going to take those savings and turn them around and hire more people and grow the economy? This is what has me kind of unclear about what the gains are going to be.
So that's one of the criticisms that was leveled against that proposal, that it did not, discriminate between those who are employers and those who aren't. But just to answer your question, I think that, all politicians are scared of the sound bites of standing up there and saying, I want to raise your sales tax and your tobacco tax, and being too specific. That would be my guess.
Everybody think the same thing?
Yeah, pretty much so.
Yeah, I think that.
Toward the end, after he spent the very long time talking about taxes and fiscal policy, he did go into the compassionate conservative mode where he talked about reforming welfare to make a one-stop place for people that are looking for aid. Up until now, if you look over the past couple years, that's always been at the forefront. What do we make of him putting that at the tail end of the speech this time?
Well, again, I think my takeaway from the speech was that, he was putting the legislature on notice, that there were things that he wanted to happen that had to happen if Ohio was going to stay open for business. And I think that's what he wanted to begin with and then sort of fall back in.
Yeah, and
The
to be fair,
compassionate-
to be fair, the whole reforming the welfare system, we have one-stop shops all around town right now, right? Because this was done previously. Now there's just reform of something that already exists. It was kind of good to hear him talk in terms of, these people need a helping hand kind of thing, and it was kind of more, I guess, give a bone as to more whack poor people over the head with the bone. So, that was good to hear. But I don't know, I just get the sense that, they already have one-stop shopping. Apparently it's not working well, which is what some of the governor's people who came to visit us recently had to say, and they want to do some reforms, but, I don't think I would have put that up front.
And I think more pertinently, this is not something he's going to get any pushback from the legislature about. Again, I think this is really a speech because he knows he's going to get some pushback, and he really does want to get his taxes through. The folks on his Human Services Innovation team who came to talk to us acknowledged that there was going to be, while this was going to cost money, they had money kind of loose in the budget that they can just redirect. And the only thing in the governor's proposal that will require the legislature to appropriate some money is the increased child care benefit. So.
I wondered before the speech began whether he would talk about a couple of subjects. One was the problems with Lake Erie, and the other was the continuing discord between communities and police. He spoke passionately about making sure people who do not feel they are heard regarding the relationship with police get heard, and he's built this committee. He did a huge call out to Nina Turner for her participation in that. So that was interesting. And then, Chris, he did not mention the lake.
Yeah, I was surprised. I think he's talking about the economy and the importance of job creation, and you're talking about an $8 billion a year just sports fishing industry that supports thousands of jobs, and Lake Erie is with the algal blooms, I mean, what happened in Toledo was unprecedented. I mean, it was a huge environmental disaster. I mean, 3 days without drinking water. And then now with the Corps pushing for open lake dump and holding the steel mill hostage over that. I think we had talked about this earlier, and you know, that really his speech was on issues that he was going to get pushed back on, as Betsy said. I think that he has spoken out about Lake Erie and how important it is. The emergency amendment that he signed last week, giving the Ohio EPA the authority to tell the Corps to go jump in the lake.
But let me stop you. I mean, the lake is central to the Ohio economy.
Absolutely.
We had the crisis. There are people that are arguing the efforts being made are not nearly enough, and as warm weather eventually approaches, we'll be dealing with it again. To not mention it just seemed like...
I know, I was surprised, like, because it was something, you know, I mean, he's being aggressive. I mean, he is being proactive as much as the state government can. And the fact that Congress is out ahead of the state government is, you know, another issue.
You know, perhaps he sees it as a regional crisis, not something that everybody in the state could relate to, even though they should. And maybe that's why he kind of left it out. Maybe he just...
I don't know, you know...
It's something he can actually take credit for action on. He can take credit for his own executive order and for both the State House and the State Senate moving quickly to address this finally in this session because of, you know, Cliff Rosenberger taking over it and, you know, rejiggering the committees on the House side. So, you know, it was curious that he didn't bring it up at all, and it does make you wonder whether, and it's not a regional issue, but whether he thinks of it that way.
But,
that would be
but at the
troubling.
same time, I mean, one of the first things he did in the wake of Toledo was he got $150 million, you know, to address infrastructure issues in the Western Basin.
But he's also said that he will not support limits on phosphorus. I mean, when you say he can't do more, the state can't do more. The state actually could do more.
The state could do a lot more, yeah.
Sharon, let's talk about education. Somebody tweeted last night during the speech, this is the first State of the State speech they can remember where higher ed was mentioned before K through 12. He spoke long and hard about the cost of college education and how he wants to rein it in. He also spoke that if the college presidents don't do what's necessary, that he'll be going to Keith Faber to do some things to them. What do you think this means?
Oh, I think this means that they need to get serious because basically Keith Faber had earlier said that he just wanted a 5% across the board cut, and I'm sure they had all the college presidents panicked, and Kasich has waded into the waters and say, hey, you know, let's not do that yet. You know, let's see, he has a special committee out there now, and let's see what they come up with and make some recommendations. And that's a better, you know, more comprehensive way to go than just whacking the colleges. And he's had a good relationship with them over the years, like I said, you know, with all the various committees that he's had, that they have done their assignments and done them to his specifications, we could say so.
On K through 12, he made the statement that the third grade reading guarantee is a resounding success. Was that something that would get agreement from the people at this table?
Well, it probably, let's say that it put the fire under many school districts to make sure that their kids weren't left behind. I know that Cleveland, you know, did all kinds of things, you know, small group tutoring and mentoring and, you know, little tests along the way to prepare the kids. So people weren't left behind, but people weren't left behind because districts took it very, very seriously and did not want to be in the news for having, you know, 1,000 third graders who couldn't read or something along those lines. And there are a lot of wiggle rooms in that law as well. I mean, you could take alternative tests, and also your parents can, you know, work it out with the principal that you are promoted to the 4th grade. So, you know, it's not quite do or die, but so that's what I think.
He also saluted the Cleveland Transformation Plan, saying it's working, which I don't know, is there evidence that it's working?
Jury's still out,
Yeah,
I think.
jury's still out.
That's what I keep hearing from people, jury's still out. But, you know, at least by teaming up with the Breakthrough Schools, you know, there's a better track record, you know, than just having Cleveland schools all by themselves there, so.
You know,
jury's still out.
The transformation plan was initiated without any additional money from the state. When the state, you know, increased school budgets for some, Cleveland didn't get any. And I was shocked by that, because I think that you should reward innovation, and at least in this budget, there is some additional money for the Cleveland schools based on its poverty indexes, but not on its innovation indexes, which is where I think that things are kind of skewed. But that said, looking at turning around a high poverty urban school district, it's like you don't do it in 2 years. And unfortunately, Cleveland has to show progress in 3 years, because it has to go back to the voters to renew the big levy that has made this possible.
He did also speak very strongly last night with regard to the funding of schools. If you recall, 4 years ago, he had taken a lot of money from wealthy districts, put it into less wealthy districts, and the legislators in those areas fought back and killed it. He's proposing to do that again, and he went hard at the legislature last night, saying, look, it doesn't make sense to take money from the wealthy districts and give it to the less wealthy. If districts can make do on their own, we need to help the lesser. Do we expect he's going to have any more success?
He's going to hear, because part of this that doesn't get talked about very much is that he has been trying to monkey with the state's reimbursements on the discontinued business taxes, both the property tax for regular businesses, but also the tangible personal property tax on utilities, which were a big factor in some of like the Solons or the Rocky Rivers or the whatever. So, Hudson. So that is actually where he got a lot of the, because those tend to be Republican communities. And that's really just the state keeping for itself what it once promised to reimburse to the school districts, frankly. So that's like a backdoor way of cutting the local government fund. So he's continuing to do that.
All right, well, that's all we have time for. Love to hear what you think of the speech. Please leave your thoughts in the comments where you found this video.